Well, welcome. Week 3. Perhaps if week 3 is a little much, then we could get into our art and lighting and literary conversations that we have before we go on the air. But I think it'll be more useful if we talk week 3 injuries with Dr. Gene, Matt Waldman. I just hope the liberal arts education is still something that is valued in this 2018 day and age, so people understand some of the things that we got to study, and not just how to make money, but maybe we can make you some money today. Gene, we're going to jump right in. Leonard Fournette. And I appreciate that you are always looking a week ahead. And obviously, if I was asking you at this time last week, I probably did, you would have said, hey, Fournette's no sure thing for next week. And you might not have said it, but parenthetically, like, no matter what happens, we have to get confirmation he's playing on Sunday morning. Well, it sounds like we have confirmation he's not playing on Sunday morning. What does that mean for next week against the Jets with Todd Bowles' job potentially on the line?
Yeah, well, and this is not to pass judgment on Leonard Fournette, but the Jaguars have been cautious with him last year with the ankle injury, and there was a time where maybe he would have been back to play a little bit sooner, except he was held out of a game for a violation of team rules. But they've never been in a big hurry to put him back on the active roster until he's been fully practicing, and that really wasn't the case again this week. There was some indication Fournette was sort of hedging his bets even as early as Thursday about whether or not he'd be on the active roster, but we heard last Friday that he was running pretty hard in rehab, and then he was back to practice on Wednesday, and he went through a week of consecutive practice. So I think it was reasonable to think that he could play this week overnight. And the first report we got from Adam Schefter was the first report saying that he was likely to play. And Ian Rappaport followed that up pretty quickly, saying, he's got an uphill battle. They're not sure. And when you hear that, Jacksonville, unlike what we've seen with DeMarco Murray and LaShawn McCoy, who may not play today either, but other running backs who tend to play through pain a little bit, Fournette may be one of those players as well, but the Jaguars aren't allowing him to do that. And once it was kind of confirmed that TJ Yeldon was healthy enough to go and that there wasn't much concern about him, the snowball sort of continued to roll and think that, Fournette isn't going to be able to take 15 plus touches and more than that in his usual workload, then they're probably going to hold him out and make sure that he's healthy and try to eliminate as much risk of aggravation as they can, especially since Corey Grant looked pretty good last week. So that's been the latest report from Schefter. He's kind of walked back his initial likely to play. It's looking more and more like Fournette's going to be active to the point where it would be really surprising if he was active at all.
Corey Grant did look really good, Matt. And it's funny because when I was watching Corey Clement, I was thinking he's kind of like Leon Washington without the wiggle. And then I watched Corey Grant. I said, there's the wiggle. There's Leon Washington with the Leon Washington wiggle. Oh, if Leon Washington just stayed healthy. Sorry, Jets fans. There's a moment to begin the season, at least Jets fans got to have a little glimmer of hope. Glimmer of hope for fantasy lineups, thinking about the shifts in the distribution of points in this Jags offense. Because on one hand, you have Blake Bortles coming into the game, coming off, I think, the best game of his career, really. However, he really struggled with Tennessee last year. Now, it's a different Tennessee defensive coordinator, not fully healthy, all hands on deck necessarily for this defense. But you say you ride the hot hand. Maybe they lean pass heavy again. Maybe that means Keelan Cole or even D.D. Westbrook if you have to dig deep. Then there's T.J. Yeldon. But we also saw, as Gene mentioned, Corey Grant looked really, really, really good. Like, I could see in a rational coaching scenario, with or without Leonard Fournette, Corey Grant becoming a Chris Thompson kind of player in this offense. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there's a lot to think about. Is there any obvious move, or is this jumbled picture I'm presenting pretty accurate when we're trying to gauge the Jags offense today?
Yeah, I mean, I think you roll with the hot hand for sure, and the Jags are certainly that. And you have to understand that Corey Grant and TJ Yeldon should combine somewhere in the range of about 20 to 25 touches for over 100 yards. The Dolphins did it in week 1, and the Houston Texans did it in week 2. And then if that's not enough, then you can take a look at what the Dolphins and Texans receivers did against the Titans defense. I mean, Tennessee is basically, I think what happened is that their defense has become part of the Nashville Tourist Board, and they're just welcoming everybody, up and in through that field. So you're probably going to end up seeing some really nice points from a player like Keelan Cole, who can get deep on you, who can work all over the field. And when you think about players like Kenny Stills, who also can play the slot and play outside, and then you see a guy like, and then of course Hopkins and Fuller, those guys perform pretty well. I mean, even Bruce Ellington. I mean, the fact that Jakeem Grant had 5 for 38 in a game is pretty interesting in itself, considering what Miami's all about. So I think that when you look at this particular situation, the only player that you might not start in the Jaguars offense who got some play last week would be Austin Seferian-Jenkins, maybe, but the Titans have notoriously not been very good as against tight end play. And when you think about Miami and Houston, neither of them really have a tight end to speak of who has been really the offense for them. So I'd say if you've got them in Jacksonville, you probably want to start them.
Yeah, that's what's going to be an interesting test here with Doug Marrone and Nathaniel Hackett and this offense, because it's funny. Keelan Cole, undrafted free agent. Corey Grant, undrafted free agent. Dede Westbrook was a 4th rounder that teams were very wary of. Blake Bortles turned back the clock about 13 months ago, and we're wondering if he's even an NFL starting quarterback. And now, and with this offensive line, Matt, you've always been good about emphasizing the offensive line before anybody else was in fantasy football. With this offensive line, remember they had Andrew Norwell to what they already had. They did lose. They did lose one of their tackles, I think. But my point is
Robinson, your favorite.
Who ended up being a terrific pick for them. But my point is, are we sleeping on this Jags offense in general because they don't have the pedigree of an Odell Beckham or a Le'Veon Bell or a Ben Roth or whatever? They don't have players that make you think this could be one of the best offenses, and they don't have a whiz offensive coordinator, play caller. But man, you watch them last week and you see some elements that are going to be very tough for defense to slow down, especially the Tennessee defense. So I'll echo your sentiments of, hey, break your ties in favor of Jags, and this could be a very, very good game. Gene, Dalvin Cook. Now, we feel reasonably confident that Dalvin Cook's not going to play today. However, now we're hearing assurances he's going to play next week. Should we even buy that in light of Leonard Fournette today and just knowing what we know? Is it possible they can make a statement like that and have that kind of knowledge a week in advance when he can't play today?
Yeah, they can make the statement. It doesn't mean that it's going to prove true, right? We're still well within the range of risk of aggravation. He's not been practicing at all, and similar to Leonard Fournette last week, he's got to go through some sort of football-related activity with his team, and hopefully, unlike Fournette, we'll see some full practices out of Cook and him be ready to go. The idea that it was just a cramp was pretty quickly disproven when Monday there was concern about a strain, and then he didn't practice on Wednesday and all the way through the week. So hopefully, this is just another situation where we're going to be a little bit extra cautious with Cook, probably because he's just coming off an ACL injury and there's no reason to risk any compensatory stuff or anything else going on with him. And then we see a full practice on Wednesday. We might get some information from Mike Zimmer after the game this week to give us a better sense, to back up what Cook had said yesterday. But until we see him on the practice field Wednesday, do some consecutive practices, and then see how they're going to list him on the game status report next week, I think we work under the same assumption with Fournette as with all running backs with soft tissue injuries, that see him on the practice field, make sure that they're preparing to be active on game day before we say that he's certainly going to play.
And Gene, I'll ask you to fill in any blanks too. I should have added to that Jags picture before I tossed it to Matt to talk about backup running backs this week starting. TJ Yeldon's not 100% either. This is why I keep my mind as fixated on Corey Grant.
Yeah, I'm still not. We don't know exactly what Yeldon's injury is. Corey Grant was playing well enough that the split in snaps last week may not have had anything to do with Yeldon's health. And I still think that they know that Fournette is not fully healthy, so there's no reason to put Yeldon out there in a practice situation where he may aggravate an injury. We've seen this off and on with Yeldon in the past. It hasn't been ankle, it's been more groin and hamstring with him, where he practices a little bit, but then he just doesn't come back, kind of similar to CJ Procise. His injury and practice participation reports are a little bit difficult to read. But there's been no concern this week from the Jaguars beat writers. Ian Rappaport essentially said he should be fine today. They didn't bring anybody up off the active roster, knowing to the active roster, knowing that Fournette probably wasn't going to play through the weekend. And again, how much of that has to do with Corey Grant's good play and knowing that they've got two capable backs or not is really hard to say. Yeldon could well be close to 100%, but I think what you guys are talking about in that Corey Grant has established himself as a viable part of that backfield. We could see that the touch distribution flip even without Yeldon's situation.
Yeah, watch out for Corey Grant. And we're talking backup running backs, Matt, because it's week 3, and we already have backup running back situations that we're looking at. We'll talk about Philadelphia, but I don't think that belongs in this conversation. Jacksonville doesn't belong in this conversation because we're talking about the Yeldon Grant split. And I'm not even sure, especially in PPR leagues, that Grant's not the better play if you had both. You said I have to play one, or you're looking at DFS, a swap out to put a Jacksonville running back in. We have 3 backup running backs that are set up to be, well, I don't necessarily call Tevin Coleman a backup, but 3 running backs that aren't the starters or listed as the starters who will be the starters this week. We've got Latavius Murray. As we were talking about Dalvin Cook. We've got Tevin Coleman, who, as you pointed out in that run, it was really a run that Tevin Coleman continues to grow as a player, and we saw him make that kind of at speed processing, using what you have move in a way that he hadn't. And then we got Giovanni Bernard at Carolina, and I know that I was watching Atlanta and Carolina yesterday, Matt, and I know that you saw some of the things I saw watching that Carolina defense against Atlanta last week. Yeah. So it comes down to this, and this is not easy. And I understand if it would cause you to hesitate, because it causes me to hesitate even as we have, less than 3 hours before the games. Coleman versus Bernard versus Murray. Pick one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that your safest pick is probably going to be Coleman, mainly because they have a way of using him that's very worthwhile for him, regardless of whether he splits touches with Ito Smith or whether he gets, a vast majority of them. And I have a feeling he's going to get a vast majority of them. And New Orleans defense is still not the greatest. So I think that when you look at it from that perspective, Coleman's going to get he's going to get red zone touches. That's pretty guaranteed. When you look at Giovanni Bernard, he would be the guy that I'd have second on this list, mainly because he's such an underrated player at this stage. I mean, I always joke that if Bill Belichick wanted to get rid of his backfield and not draft a back, he could have just gotten Giovanni Bernard and he would have been able to do everything for them. He could have been like Kevin Falk plus in that offense. And I think that he's going to have a nice game because even though they're missing Billy Price, the offensive line has played, much better than last year, and they're opening up creases for him. So I like those options. But I just want to say, before we go forward, you mentioned the Minnesota, and I saw this graphic that I just thought was really great that I want to share. And I'm hoping that you can see it here. Yeah. It's the
weather map.
Arrived in Minnesota, but apparently that's Beloit, Wisconsin. Yeah. So maybe Josh Allen is hoping that he's going to play Beloit College this weekend. So anyway,
that would be an upgrade. And I want to go back to this backup running back point for one more take, because I have them actually listed in PPR terms. I have them Bernard, Coleman, Murray. In non-PPR, I like Bernard this week because what I saw from the Carolina defense last week was that to me it underscores just how feeble the Dallas offense must be if they only managed 1 touchdown against them. But what about the 3 of them? We can put them all together against some running back ones that we haven't gotten our production from. Like, I got to bring him up. With David Johnson, would you play David Johnson over Coleman or Bernard or Latavius Murray this week?
Well, considering the matchup against the Bears, I mean, that's a tough one. I mean, I think that you have to look at this and say that maybe I would play him ahead of Latavius Murray, and only because I think that the Buffalo defense is the one redeeming aspect of this team. And also it just seems like teams have jumped ahead early enough or done whatever they've wanted to early enough that you could almost see Murray getting some rest this week.
Exactly. Mike Boone or maybe Rock Thomas. Watch the inactives to see which of those Vikings backup running backs gets run, because and even you throw in a Hail Mary and a DFS lineup. One of those, whichever one's active, and one of the two will be active.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think otherwise, though, you look at Tevin Coleman and you say he's actually a starter. He's been a co-starter all these years in the way that Atlanta plays him. And then with Bernard, he'd been a co-starter all these years until this particular, first 2 games of the season. So if you have to convince yourself a little bit of this, you can just think about the fact that you're not putting a bench player in the place of David Johnson. You're actually taking veteran starters and putting them in place of him because the matchup's that clearly better, and the offensive line and offense as a whole in Arizona has been letting you down. And until David Johnson basically displays, or the coaching staff displays, that they're going to feed David Johnson the ball as a receiver, then maybe it's time to say let's hold off a bit.
He's on fantasy probation right now.
Yeah.
What a different set of metrics that you would be looking at if you were weighing one of these new starters versus Kenyan Drake against Oakland this morning.
I mean, I think for me, it's just that I'm still waiting for Kenyan Drake to mature as a runner fully, and I just don't think it's quite there. He's going to give you that. He's like in the Tevin Coleman stages of his development right now, which is he's exciting everybody, and the people who are ready for big grand pronouncements because they saw a big play are going to say he should be the starter, just like they were saying that about Tevin Coleman over Devonta Freeman when he was a rookie. He should be the starter. He had these big plays. And I think the difference is that he's just not quite ready yet. He's not as refined yet as a runner to make the decisions you need that are on the boring plays that are necessary. And so until he kind of proves that a little bit more, I think guys who are proven, like Tevin Coleman and Giovanni Bernard, are better options, because you're not going to see 20 touch volume out of Drake right now, especially with Gore there. And so I think it's just something that simple, where if you draft, but a lot of people are not going to like that because they drafted Drake, expected good things, and the bias of, but he's liable to do this at any moment, or he's such a better athlete than Gore, is that biases that's going to hold them back from making probably the maturest decision.
Yeah, and just I'll add one thing, and Matt read about this in the gut check, and I saw this too watching Atlanta. Ito Smith is not a mere satellite back, and while did they not really lose anything going from Coleman to Smith last week, and that might make some decisions really interesting for them in free agency. Gene, another backup running back situation, I alluded to it, and I feel for you sometimes, Gene, but you handle it so well. You carry the load so well, because I'm asking you things that I know you can't really give us any kind of certainty on, but you can at least make us feel better about not having certainty, or confirm that, no, we can't have certainty. Because with Corey Clement, we've got 2 layers to this. One is that J.J. is not going to play and Darren Sproles isn't going to play. But the other is that Clement pops up on the injury report late in the week. And Clement is not exactly a guy that they've ever used to be a 20 or 25 touch back anyway. So we look at Coleman, we look at Bernard, we look at Murray, and we say, well, these guys are going to carry the load because of injuries ahead of them. We can't necessarily say that about Clement. And it's the Eagles' MO in the backfield to split that up anyway. So if you're weighing Clement a little further down your card against running backs that aren't necessarily full-time running backs, or even looking at him as that ultra cheap DFS play that makes your lineup come together because he's so cheap, hey, you could get valuable touches in the Eagles' offense. What kind of guidance can you give us on how to handle Clement this week?
I think we can be reasonably certain that he's going to play today. Les Bowen was really the only Philadelphia beat writer to say much about it, and his comment was that he intends to play, and that was on Friday. Ian Rappaport overnight said that he should be fine, so he's going to be active and play. They didn't bring anybody else up to the active roster other than Josh Adams earlier this week when it became evident that Jay was probably not going to be able to go, and we're still a week or two at least away from Darren Sproles returning. But there are more layers to this than just who's in the backfield. With Carson Wentz returning and Doug Peterson saying that they're going to want to max protect for him, Jason Peters kind of struggled through last week's game with this quad injury, and he was limited this week. He's going to play, but it becomes an issue on how they're going to max protect without Darren Sproles. With a limited Jason Peters, with really no blocking tight ends. I don't think you'd consider Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert as an obvious blocking option there. So I think that's going to play into the calculus about how many snaps and what type of snaps Corey Clement gets as well. So I don't think there's any question that he's going to play, but it just seems like his touch ceiling, it's going to be hard for it to reach 20 carries. Doug Peterson also said that they were mindful of how much they're going to use him because he's a key special teams contributor as well. We know from the Carson Wentz and Alshon Jeffrey and other situations over the years that the Eagles are very mindful of player fatigue and its increased risk of injuries. And right now, the Eagles, even though they're likely to get Jeffrey back soon, without Mike Wallace and Mac Hollins and Darren Sproles out for a while, we don't know the status of Jay Ajayi. I don't think they're really going to want to risk a fatigue injury with Clement in any situation. So between the fatigue question, between the role on special teams question, between not knowing how they're going to approach max protect with Carson Wentz and who he's going to throw to, it's really up in the air about how much we'll see from Clement. I'm not aware of how good a pass protector he is. So it's possible that if he's the best pass protector of the three they have between Smallwood and Josh
Adams.
I don't know why Bates I have this thing with 5-letter words that end in S and things like that. So I wanted to put Bates in there for some reason. With Josh Adams, which one of those players is likely to see more time? I think it's unlikely that we're going to see a ceiling expectation for Clement today, but the weather is in play here now. I don't know, lots of moving parts. What are you guys thinking about?
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be a bit of an ugly game. If watching the games last week, if you were to ask me which defense had the performance most above expectations or that forced me to reconsider them, it was Indianapolis. They were fantastic against Washington. Alex Smith wasn't playing badly in that game. Washington, it wasn't like their offense was shooting themselves in the foot over and over again. Indy's Darius Leonard, South Carolina State. Ooh, I mean, Matt Eberflus has this defense playing really well. And Philadelphia is shorthanded in many ways. I think this could be, was a score in Washington last week, 21-9. I mean, that kind of, in terms of over-unders, in terms of points scored, because that Philly's defense at home is a monster, an absolute monster. But Matt, let's sift through some of the issues on the Philly side really quick. And hopefully, these are kinds of questions that I just want to touch on because there's so many angles here. Jordan Matthews, is there anything to see here with Jordan Matthews rejoining the Eagles?
Yeah, I mean, he's still an NFL caliber wide receiver, so he's capable of being able to do some work for you in the slot, and he might be able to have a decent day for you if you say that the chemistry is quick enough to develop there based on past relationships with people. But I don't know if it's enough to want to do anything with him at this early of a stage.
What about Josh Adams? Is there with Jay and this back issue, and I know there's a Dr. Gene element to this too, but anytime it's back issues, we know that we're never totally out of the woods. But based on what you saw from him at Notre Dame, the surprise undrafted free agent, surprised that he went undrafted, at least based on his production. Could we be talking about Josh Adams more down the line?
Yeah, we could, especially because he looked healthy enough, because the big issue last year was that he was playing on a bad knee, and you could tell. And I mean, it was very apparent to tell that he could not move around the way that he needed to. But he's a guy that has that long speed. He's a big back. He's one of those weird archetypes for running backs where you're big, but you don't have tremendous power, but you're fast, but you don't have tremendous acceleration. So he's capable, especially behind this athletic line, if he can get downhill and be kind of a bully. And I think that that's possible in this particular offense. It's just a matter, again, of who they're going to trust more as a pass protector. And I'd have to say it's going to be Corey Clement.
Yeah. How about the Eagles if they get Clement and Adams, just basically gaming the league on these undrafted running backs. So many undrafted running backs this year. We're going to be talking about Corey Grant. We have another one. We have another one in Minnesota, whether it's Mike Boone or Rock Thomas or both of them.
It's going to be a few years where we're going to see running backs from this terrific class who otherwise would have been drafted.
Right, Chris Warren.
Yeah, exactly. Who are going to come back and go, where did he come from? And then we'll look back at this class. And while it wasn't unbelievably exciting this year, maybe for what people expect out the gate, in 5 years, we'll look back and go, wow, that really was a good class.
And it's really quickly, when you were describing Josh Adams, Andre Williams popped into my head, long speed, but no acceleration, size, but no power.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, but I think Coleman's a little smarter of a back than Andre Williams was. I never was a big fan of him, but it was, and also Cole. He's also a better blocker. He's actually Andre Williams. He just didn't get it.
Oh, the Giants' follies at running back. Saquon Barkley should probably put a stop to that. Gene, we've got some wide receiver situations that are, quite frankly, a pain because these are matchups that we want to exploit, and these are players that we know can exploit them. Let's start with San Francisco against Kansas City and Marquise Goodwin, because we saw it last week with Will Fuller, and I'm no doctor, but I feel like a deep bruise is something that I'm less worried about aggravation in game than a hamstring. But we saw Will Fuller come back with a hamstring and look like fantastic Will Fuller. Play Will Fuller today, by the way. Any Will Fuller or questions, play Will Fuller. Marquise Goodwin, though, it's Kansas City. Gene, he could score like 3 touchdowns on 3 targets. What do we do? Because then on the flip side, if Goodwin's not going to play, then we're thinking more about Pierre Garçon. We're thinking more about Dante Pettis. We're thinking more about George Kittle, even as a flex. What do we know about Goodwin?
Not much. Sorry. No, I think it's a concern that it took over a week for this quad bruise to settle down enough, which makes you wonder if there was enough inflammation in there around the muscle that they didn't want to risk him. And by the way, this is why teams rest players like Will Fuller. You give them an extra week, and they're that much more likely to not end up in a decoy situation or not be able to gain the separation that you want them to in these situations. So you hope that's the case with Goodwin. The positive things about Goodwin is that he was limited in practice all week. He was adamant that he was going to continue to practice. The only slightly negative thing working against us here is that Kyle Shanahan would not commit to Goodwin playing today, and said he wanted to watch him kind of through the weekend and see how things went during pregame. I agree with you in that if there's no muscle issue there, structural issue there like a strain, and it is just that it took some time for that blood, the bruise inside that muscle to resorb, that if he is active, it's reasonable to expect him to be healthy enough to continue his full workload, because last week they weren't ready for him to do that. So I think if he's active, you can trust him. There is some risk of aggravation. You're correct in that it's probably not as high as it's more of a compensatory risk than it is an aggravation risk, but it is there. And it's possible that they only put him in certain situations. Those are things that we don't know. So with a little bit of luck, we'll get some information as we get closer to game time. I know that may not be in enough time for some of you out there making decisions, but there wasn't really anything overnight about Goodwin, and we're just working on incomplete information and the fact that, what he did on the practice field this week.
So we go to this matchup. Nice shirt, Matt.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good. And on the Kansas City side, hopefully there aren't any more questions about do you play Kansas City players or not. It's pretty simple. But on the San Francisco side, it's not as simple. First of all, I'll ask you, because I don't want to ambush you. Did you get to watch any of the San Francisco-Detroit game from last week?
Yeah, Detroit was in the giving spirit, and they gave up a ton. Yeah,
they did. But Jimmy Garoppolo, I think it was Nick Mencio, who's I'm in the Roto World Dynasty League with, and I think Nick became a paramedic over the last 2 years too. Big ups for that. Said that he saw Jimmy Garoppolo. Well, we could go back to was it Eastern Illinois? Eastern Illinois, right?
Yeah.
We can go back to his Eastern Illinois tape and conversations we had. We call it turtling. I've got a turtle that's recovering from being mauled by a dog right next to me here. So I don't want to besmirch turtles because this is one tough turtle. So I don't necessarily want to say turtling anymore after I've seen what this turtle can do. But I saw the brain freeze with Garoppolo last week many times. And Detroit isn't exactly a fierce pass rush team. And a little worried about Garoppolo, in a way that it makes me say, okay, we're going to develop a line this year of who's the worst quarterback against Kansas City you'll start. Do you start Joe Flacco or do you start Brian Tannehill or whatever? And it seems like, okay, Jimmy Garoppolo is above that line based on his reputation coming into this year, but is he riding on reputation? And we can get into specific data points, but I want you to give an overall feel about Garoppolo and then just other players in the San Francisco offense, because there's a wide range for Breida. There's a wide range for Kittle. There's a wide range for Pettis. There's a wide range for Goodwin if he plays. There's a wide range for Pierre Garcon. And I say with Kansas City returning home, and of course, because I'm looking at DFS lineups and looking for a cheap defense, maybe this is Justin Houston's week. Maybe this is a Kansas City week if Jimmy Garoppolo is hesitant in the pocket. So it's not the Kansas City side that you love to talk about, but the other side against the Kansas City defense, who will be without Eric Berry again this week. What's our best angle here? Or might this be a week to say, let's see and not necessarily assume?
Yeah, I would say this. We're going to first overthink it and not overthink it. So the overthink it part is that Jimmy Garoppolo, since his days at Eastern Illinois, the problem that he had, as you described, is that when pressure comes, he tends to either fold up and fall down, or try and get rid of the ball in a manner that seems kind of almost Gabbard-esque in the way that that Gabbard did when he was at Jacksonville, which is just get rid of it and not see where he's throwing it to directly, or see where he's throwing it to and end up putting it really off target because he's not setting his feet and doesn't want to take the hit. Now, we've seen him take hits. We've seen him take some tough shots, even last year. So I don't think it's that he's afraid of getting hit. I think that his mind operates faster than his body when certain situations happen, and when they get stressful, he accelerates his process to the point that his body can't keep up, and then he delivers inaccurate plays. And we saw that against Minnesota or early this season, where he made a throw that some people were like, well, it was just, the receiver fell down. And yeah, the receiver did fall down, but it was I still look at it, and even if the receiver stayed upright, I think it still would have been a dangerous throw, if you ask me. And we saw a number of plays like that last week too, where it's just, he rushed. And so you look at Kansas City, the one thing they can do is rush the passer. You would like to see them use Justin Houston more than dropping him in coverage. And if they, if they do that a little bit more and let him play his best, what he does best, he could have 5 sacks in this game. He has that kind of ability. But, that's the overthinking aspect of it. The part where we just say don't overthink it is that Kansas City has been a relative sieve in the passing game. They're not playing Justin Houston the way that you would like to see as probably a fantasy player. And at the same time, you look at this, it's probably going to be a high scoring game, and Garoppolo is good enough to be able to put up a massive number of points. The bigger question is if Goodwin's not playing, can he and Pettis get on the same page? Because Pettis has gotten open every week with some really nice routes, but is that because he's matched up with one guy and just, getting open against the slot corner, or he ran a really good route, but the rest of his routes, he's not, I need to see some of the all-22 to see how he's doing with that and see how he's performing. But from what I have seen just a little bit, without viewing every snap myself, he's getting open. So the onus, I think, is more on Garoppolo being familiar. And if he shows a little bit more trust there, then it may work out. But I'll just add this: long term, the Patriots did trade him, and name a quarterback that's worked out that the Patriots have traded away during the Tom Brady era.
Yeah. And by the way, and in case folks didn't see it, last week Jimmy Garoppolo threw away a 17-point lead and got bailed out by a holding call behind the play. Holding call away. He threw a terrible pick six that should have been the final blow in erasing us. I think it was 30-13 that game was.
Yeah.
And he got let off the hook by that call. But we'll see. I'm interested. I think that this could be a surprise zonk day for Jimmy Garoppolo. So on that note, it's Jimmy Garoppolo or Blake Bortles.
I'll take Blake Bortles because I like the weapons better.
See that, and I'm talking about today. Like Jimmy Garoppolo or Kirk Cousins, even though he might be sitting by the third quarter.
Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. Like Jimmy Garoppolo is not this slam dunk, but Jimmy Garoppolo or Matt Ryan against the Saints.
Matt Ryan.
Yeah, so you start to see
that's close, but I would take Matt Ryan.
I mean, and now I may find one where you're going to say Garoppolo, Jimmy Garoppolo or Russell Wilson going back to Seattle, but against Dallas.
I'm taking Russell Wilson.
So folks can see that Garoppolo is not this slam dunk. Oh, play the Kansas quarterback against Kansas City, because he's not playing well enough. I mean, maybe if this was week 15 or 16 of last year, the way Garoppolo was playing, we might say, oh, well, you got to play Garoppolo against that matchup.
So can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Do you think that is his budget high in DFS? I know this is not a DFS show. But
no, so at least in the one place that I play, his price is right around Matt Ryan. It's right around Russell Wilson.
Do you think it's inflated because those gamblers really like the fact that he was dating an actress in the summertime? I mean, do you think that maybe there's a little inflation there?
Maybe.
Sponsored by no, we can't talk about that.
A different kind of performance. There's lots of Sorry Joe's direction we could go here, but we won't. Instead,
we'll say go there. We just went to the line.
We'll go there by accident somehow. I'm sure. I still remember in 5 minute troll. I'm going to do this because because I want to giggle. There was a 5-minute troll episode where the line was, "Will he pull out in time?" Anyway, Gene. This is a more not a sorry Joe, but a sorry Matt Waldman, because excellent work, Matt, in the top 10 this week of detailing why Marvin Jones is a buy low. But maybe he's a buy low next week,
right?
Because he may not play, or he might play, or there's optimism, and this one is a real pain because I mean, hopefully you have Chris Godwin or James Washington, or I mean even Philip Dorsett or somebody that you can wait on Marvin Jones, because that upside, I mean, he's going to have a 6 for 160 and 2 touchdown game. And this is certainly a matchup where it could yield that, but he got to play, Gene. What do we know?
Not much. Again, sorry.
Yeah. No.
We did get something from Ian Rappaport about an hour ago that said there was optimism that he'd be able to play, but they wanted to watch him throughout the day. So we don't know exactly when the injury happened. It's assumed that it happened late this week in practice. That's when he was added to the injury report. We don't know what the injury is, how severe it is, how limiting it could be, whether or not he's going to be active. So I think you're right. I think you keep him in your lineup at the risk of having a 0. Try to find a hedge, even if it's a really slight one, if you can. I think the comment from Jones from Rappaport is optimistic enough where you can probably keep him in your lineup. And generally, no news is good news when beat writers don't have something to say on Friday or Saturday morning after a late week addition to the injury report. But, bottom line is we just don't know, and you're going to have to watch the situation throughout the weekend, rather.
So, and I've had some questions already, including from my man Isaac, and these are hard. This is hard fantasy math, Matt, because I mean, in the background here too, the first year in Detroit, when everyone said Marvin Jones wasn't really that good, they overpaid him or whatever, it's because he was playing hurt, which on one hand gave us that narrative, like Emmanuel Sanders this year, that there's more there, and we saw more, but at the same time, it shows you that hey, when he's playing hurt, it limits him. When he's playing hurt, it can affect his game if that indeed is how we revise that looking back. So roughly in my head, Matt, I think if it's a 6 or 7 point play, so for instance, one of the plays was Corey Davis. And I think, okay, well, Corey Davis against the Jags, 3 for 35. I mean, that's the 4 for 37. That's the kind of game that I would expect, especially with Blaine Gabbert. That's the second time Blaine Gabbert's come up already. So the 6 or 7 point line, like I'd rather risk the 0 with Marvin Jones, knowing that a 20 or plus game is also there, than just take the 6 or 7 points. But this is my take. What's your take on how to advise people if they have to decide whether to play Marvin Jones without knowing whether he's going to be active and not having someone on the bench they can pivot to if he's not?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that, overall it's early in the season, so you can kind of get a chance to see how that injury is affecting him this week. And if you start him and it doesn't work out, it's one game and it's early on. I'm always kind of the believer that most good fantasy players understand that you could go 0-5 and still make the playoffs and turn things around if you're assessing and staying with it and not giving up early. If you have enough resiliency that you stay interested in what's going on around the league, you're going to be able to make tweaks to your team that's going to turn it around. But Marvin Jones, I mean, for me, I'll just say personally, I have him in a number of lineups, obviously, and I'm looking at guys like Frank Gore, Royce Freeman, Jordy Nelson, Dante Pettis, Anthony Miller. Those are kind of my options that I'm looking at in terms of starters. And at this stage, I'm thinking, well, maybe Royce Freeman, maybe Frank Gore, maybe Dante Pettis, but none of them excite me enough to say, let me just see what the warm-ups have to say. But of course, the warm-ups are tonight at 7:20, so you've got to make that decision now. I mean, I think that the way I look at it is that if you're in one of those lineups where you're starting him as your third or fourth receiver, you probably keep him in your lineup. If he's your second receiver, then I think you need to go with somebody else.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's going to be an interesting game tonight, with master against pupil. And then adding another wrinkle to this, by the way, Adam Schefter reports that the Lions and the Patriots had the Rob Gronkowski trade in place this offseason. And Gronk said he would retire if they did it. Go ahead.
And there's one other point that's interesting about that. I mean, the Patriots last week, they just said, we're going to play one high and we're going to play lots of man coverage against Keelan Cole. Now, the question is Keelan Cole better than Marvin Jones? And I would say, are they close to equal? And based on your reaction, I think the reaction is pretty clear that most people would say it's close to equal in terms of what they can do at the catch point. And then Marvin Jones, I'd say, is a better route runner, maybe. But with that in mind, why can't Marvin Jones, if Keelan Cole can whip this secondary, maybe Marvin Jones can too, and maybe they'll play more man. But at the same time, it depends on who they match up. And so far, you're seeing some of the better cornerbacks playing against Kenny Golladay now. So Marvin Jones might have a nicer matchup there. So I think I'd still lean towards Jones in this scenario, but it is a risky play.
Yeah, look, if Jones is active, like I said, 6 for 116, 2 touchdowns, absolutely within his range of possibilities against this Patriots secondary with the game script I have here. So Gene, Rob Gronkowski threatened to retire. He said, I will retire before I go to the Lions. So if we at Football Guys said, we're trading you to fill in the blank, that you would say you retire. No, not really. Not really.
Wow.
I won't do that, but I just thought it'd be fun because maybe there are some places.
The Steelers?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask him about, because I was going to. What if we made?
There's this little red hang up, leave call button.
Yeah, right. If we made him root for the Steelers, if we made him watch Ben Roethlisberger and not be able to express himself, maybe then Gene would threaten to retire. The Steelers,
I'm not that type of diva.
You're not. No, you're not. You're not. I'm not either. I don't even. We don't really have divas at Football Guys. We're lucky that way. About those Steelers. Ben Roethlisberger might be threatening to retire potentially because the right side of his line is basically like a turnstile. Maybe. Give us the latest, because it's a Monday night thing, and we aren't going to have. We're projecting these decisions, and again, cheap defense, Tampa Bay defense. Why might the Tampa Bay defense be one of the surprises of Week 3?
Well, it seemed like there was an outside chance that both of these players would play soon. One of them being David DeCastro on his hand injury. There was maybe even a little bit of optimism that he was going to play last week, but didn't practice this week. Really seems doubtful to go. They're probably going to give him a chance to make sure that hand is right before they return him. Marcus Gilbert has tried to battle through hamstring injuries before and missed time. They're both listed as doubtful, but Sig, you guys know this. The Steelers do not play players that don't practice, especially that don't practice toward the end of the week. And although Gilbert told reporters on Friday that he considered himself a game time decision and was going to try to be able to go on Monday night, it's past doubtful. They didn't declare him out is the only optimistic thing that you can say about DeCastro and Gilbert. But, very high percentage chance that neither one of them are going to be active. And you hope that Gilbert's hamstring injury was close enough that maybe he could have played. But this is, it's an 8-day week for him. Wasn't able to go Monday night, a short week the following week. Maybe that plays into the role with these guys as well, with some of the games they have coming up. So unlikely for both of them at best.
Play all your Bucks, right, Matt? Play all your Buccaneers.
Without a doubt. Maybe Cam Brate not, but that's
No.
not the only one.
No, and I've got Cameron Braid on a bunch of dynasty rosters, and this is the week that I'm feeling like he's walking the plank just because what am I waiting around for? Him getting traded. How might this half of an offensive line deficiency affect Ben Roethlisberger? Because it's Road Ben. Road Ben only doesn't need any nudge? Could this be something that we're still playing Juju and still playing Brown, still playing James Conner, but maybe you're looking for a tight end like a Vance McDonald or Jesse James, or again DFS, or weighing Ben Roethlisberger against other quarterbacks in your lineup.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at the Buccaneers and what they've given up, I mean, players who aren't very athletic at the tight end position aren't going to get you a ton. I mean, I think you might be able to get 30 to 40 yards out of a guy like Jesse James, and then, when you look at Vanette, as a possibility, I guess, but I just think that this team is going to run on its wide receivers at this stage of the game. And then when you think about really the quality of offensive lines that Tampa Bay's faced in New Orleans and Philadelphia, those are two of the best lines in the league. So I think we're going to see this Steelers line collapse a bit. I mean, the last time DeCastro wasn't really himself and healthy enough to play, Le'Veon Bell everyone was questioning whether or not he was actually going to be a good running back in the league, because when DeCastro was out as a rookie with an ACL tear. So I think that this team is going to struggle this week. I would not be surprised if they lose, and I would not be surprised if Ben Roethlisberger doesn't throw for 300 yards. I think he'd probably be more in the 250 range and might have an interception or two.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking at here as a potential trap game for the Steelers. Gene, let's talk about one other injury situation on the offensive line, and one that at least Carolina has a bye next week. They're not going to get back their right or left tackle, and their best offensive lineman, I think even when their right and left tackle have been healthy, is probably Trey Turner. And Trey Turner. And again, going back to Carolina, Dallas, we can just throw that game out. Boy, I hope nobody has to watch Seattle and Dallas this afternoon. That's going to be a real snooze fest. But we saw last week, Atlanta, I don't know, when's Vic Beasley going to break out? Tack McKinley's coming along, but Atlanta's defense has been shorthanded. And Cam Newton did some things last week. He also made a few throws that should have been picked, but he actually played really well last week. And in fact, if CJ Anderson had a ball pop up off of his pads, then maybe we would talk about a great comeback by Cam Newton. But this is the Cincinnati defense, Gene. This is Geno Atkins. This is Carlos Dunlap. This is Carl Lawson. With this offensive line, what do you see? And do we think that this Trey Turner situation could extend past the bye because it's a concussion, or are we hearing some things that should resolve it?
I don't think I haven't heard anything that suggests that he's made enough progress to expect him to be back next week. And we've said for years and years and years, if a player is continuing to have symptoms after a week, and it seems like Turner is because he's not been cleared to practice at all yet, then it becomes an indefinite situation. And that doesn't mean months and months and months and career threatening and all that sort of stuff. But it means that he needs to be getting back to practice soon. And once you go a couple of weeks without being allowed to progress through the early stages of the concussion return to play protocol, the teams are going to progress you even a little bit more slowly through the latter stages as well. You don't go through, taking 2 weeks to recover through the first couple of stages and then briskly go through the last stages usually. But every concussion is a little bit different. Every recovery is a little bit different. You hope that they get him back, but I haven't heard anything that says one way or the other yet.
So this is kind of like the Ben Roethlisberger take, Matt. Is Cam Newton walking into an ambush here? Cincinnati has the players that, I wanted to see Vic Beasley really coming into his own by this point in his career, but I'm not seeing it. But we are seeing Carl Lawson taking those steps, and we know what Dunlap can do. We know what Geno Atkins can do. Cam Newton actually played a pretty good game last week. I think it may be tougher even though he's at home this week. What's your outlook with Carolina missing 3/5 of their offensive line?
Well, if there's anybody that can handle that, it seems to be Newton. So it's one of those situations that he's such a wild card because there are games that he plays extremely well, and this team clicks, and he's able to overcome pretty good odds. And they have a player now in DJ Moore
Yes.
who can run after the catch and is extremely good at being able to turn small plays into big plays. And this is when you look at the Bengals, they've always been pretty good, actually. I think they've always been pretty good at limiting that to some extent. They've been a pretty good team at stopping yak. So with that in mind, this is more about, can you beat them one-on-one in coverage? And they're not easy in that regard. So I'm going to have to say this is a trap game for Cam Newton as well, and I would not be enthusiastic about starting him or any Carolina Panther outside of maybe Christian McCaffrey,
Right.
just due to volume.
Yeah, didn't you see, by the way, tell me I'm imagining this, Matt, that Christian McCaffrey, and I'm going to say I was wrong. There is something special about Christian McCaffrey, or more than one thing potentially. I mean, his balance through contact was excellent last week, but his ability to adjust to these passes and come down in a way that he was set up to get upfield. I mean, he could twist and contort and adjust, and he would always come down fully balanced and ready to get upfield. And Cam Newton was not throwing the ball accurately to him to set up run after catch opportunities. He was just creating them himself. Yeah. And then when CJ Anderson came in, Cam was throwing these fastballs and Anderson couldn't handle them. Anderson's not a bad receiver out of the backfield. He's just not Christian McCaffrey.
No, and that's the thing. I mean, Christian McCaffrey is kind of like those toys that you find in the bin back in when we were growing up, where like the waist kind of spins all the way around at a 360. He looks like he's a player that has that kind of thing going on. But also the way that they set up those plays were nice, because they gave Cam plenty of room to be able to throw the ball where McCaffrey could adjust and it not be a big deal, because they were running types of screens to him in that flat, or they were putting 2 to 3 on one side and running off, whether it was 2 tight ends or 3 receivers, running off the defense in that zone, and then just pitting McCaffrey one-on-one with a safety or a linebacker who was playing 10, 12 yards off where the catch point was. And if they can do that against Cincinnati, that can work out. And I would think that the linebackers in Cincinnati without Burfict, that may be the weak point of this defense. So McCaffrey would still be a good play. I just don't know if anybody else will be, unless they get more involved a little more than they have, and I don't think that's going to happen.
No, I don't think so either. It's going to be an interesting one to watch. This is one where the Bengals could go to 3-0 too. Gene, I'll tee this one up for you. The football gods taketh away Joey Bosa. Do the football gods giveth J.J. Watt? I know that you still have him listed, but it feels like much more than last year. We're getting closer to full J.J. Watt.
Yeah, and we know this, it takes more time than what the recovery timetable suggests to get over these back surgeries, and particular type of back injuries. I don't know, in the same way that we're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop a little bit on Rob Gronkowski and his back conditions. We've seen it with Tyler Eifert and Jason Pierre-Paul and many other players. There's a decline in production after this happens, and the career tends to be a little bit shorter. But that doesn't mean that for a brief period of time, whether it be a year or 2 or 3 to 5 years, that players can't be healthy and very productive after these injuries. And I think we're starting to see that with Watt. He came back too quickly after the first surgery, had plenty of time to recover after the second. You're seeing him spend less time on the ground because his core strength is returned. You're seeing teams tell you what they think about him by double teaming him more frequently, by shifting protection his way to make sure that he's not affecting the game. And he has been able to do that. The sacks may not be there in the same way that they have been previously, but I think he can still affect the game. And you hope that Jadeveon Clowney and Whitney Merciless get healthy enough to where they're not limited enough where they can play but not be effective. So when the three of those guys are together and productive, it's a devastating thing for that front in Houston.
And Dallas's blitz schemes were devastating to the Giants last week, Matt. This week it is J.J. Watt and the Texans going up against them. I saw some glimmers last week that Deshaun Watson looked a lot closer to 2017 Deshaun Watson, I think, than he got credit for. And given him a little more time, some of the premature calls it was all a fluke, might be reversed because of Will Fuller and because of what I see Deshaun Watson doing. With that in mind? 0-2 against 0-2 with the Giants and the Texans. Are you feeling that same optimism for the Texans offense and Deshaun Watson, not just today, but going forward?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it was all about the fact that the New England Patriots did a good job of saying run the football and don't throw it deep, and Deshaun Watson and the offense didn't really listen to that, and they paid for it. And I think that the Patriots are the most rational coaching that you find in the NFL. So you're not going to find that as teams doing that as well against the Houston Texans. So when you look at it from this perspective, you have to understand that if you're calling for Deshaun Watson to not be a good player because he played the Patriots defense and the best in-game adjustment coaches in the league, then you're missing out a major part of how football works. So I think that this is one of those situations where the Giants haven't given up a ton to opposing quarterbacks at this stage, but I don't think they've really needed to. And watching Dak Prescott last week, he actually played much better last week and looked more like the Dak Prescott that I've seen before, whereas in Carolina, Dak Prescott actually looked more like the Mississippi State quarterback that I misevaluated in terms of just seeming to just miss or be off target in a lot of ways. And I don't think Deshaun Watson's going to have that issue. I don't think there's going to be a huge game for him, just because you wonder how many yards he's going to get on the ground this week. Like, I still think that he's recovering from that knee enough that he's not fully confident on the level that he wouldn't tell the media. And so, from this standpoint, it may not be a great game, but you're going to see again the growing trend towards he's just fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, including for fantasy. I think this is a good moment to try to get Deshaun Watson if he's on a roster where, if it was someone drafted Mahomes and Watson and they're just looking at Watson, it's like, I don't need this piece. Last question for you, James. We've got a couple minutes left because you're Switzerland when it comes to NFL rooting tendencies. But 2 weeks into the season, is there anybody that started to make your heart pitter patter, flutter, capturing you? Anything that is making Gene happy?
No.
Wow. Well,
that's kind of an odd Swiss quirk.
Well,
yeah, that is a very Swiss answer.
I think the NFL season changes so much from week to week that a lot of the storylines that we see earlier in the season may not progress through the end. I'm excited about Pat Mahomes. I would like to see that offense continue. I like it when Matt Waldman's favorites do well.
Yeah.
So that's been compelling to me. And I think it's been, although the injury report was pretty long, this week it's been nice that teams and players have been relatively healthy overall. So of course I'm excited about that too.
Yeah, that's always good, and we like for things to proceed smoothly. Well, Matt, I guess we know you. It's just winding it up. Front and center, Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes, and that's been wonderful. And I think that year after year, it's proven that people who listen to Matt and take everything he says seriously, there's a lot to benefit from, not just from your fantasy teams, but just your understanding of the game. But outside of Kansas City. Well, actually, since it was off the air, I'll tee it up this way. Are you in now? Are you back in? Are you going to get the Browns tattoo? You're going to get the Baker tattoo. Are you in? Are you fully back into your Cleveland roots now that Baker Mayfield's the quarterback in Cleveland?
I mean, I'm always still going to be a Browns fan, whether I like it or not. So it's one of those situations that it just doesn't leave you. It's still there. So
but does it feel like you might like it finally?
It feels exciting, and it's not so much because of Baker Mayfield as well as he played so far and the way that that's looking. I mean, the fact that he can play with tempo and the fact that he can make reads that Tyrod Taylor just doesn't do as comfortably really turned around this offense, in the second half of that game. But what really has been exciting for me since the first week has been the defense. Because that's what the Browns the Browns that I grew up on were a defensive team. They had a pass rush, they had a secondary, and when you have guys like Denzel Ward and Myles Garrett together, that's a nice combo. And Joe Schobert plays well. You've got Jamie Collins, who isn't bad at all, and Larry Ogunjobi. This is a team that, strikes me more of the personality of what the Browns really wanted to be when they drafted Courtney
Brown.
And it just didn't work out for them. And it just went downhill from there. But I think that, this is a team that you can start to see things being built upon. And a lot of credit should go to Sashi Brown, and a lot of that credit, and then also this team kind of together. But you're going to see different people take credit for it, and more credit than they should. It's kind of a combination of things here.
Next week at Oakland, winning streak. Gene, can Myles Garrett continue to play basically every single snap as a defensive end?
Yeah, that was crazy. How many has he had now? Like averaging 60 to 70 a game, and maybe more than that. We've seen it from Jason Pierre-Paul. We've seen it from J.J. Watt. There have been other teams that do similar things, but and continue to play at this pace with really not taking any plays off and continuing to make some of the crazy executing stunts in the way he has and everything else. I think somebody put something on Twitter that showed him, executing a tackle end stunt where he crossed 3 or 4 different gaps and still was able to do a swim move and get to the quarterback in less than a couple of seconds. Yeah, he's young and he can. Some players are just like that, and you hope that fatigue doesn't catch up with him. But man, that Cleveland defense from back to front is getting better and better and better.
Yeah, even some fantasy potential. Sorry, Gene, mentioning fantasy defenses. God, folks, it's fun. This has been a stimulating NFL season already, 2 weeks in. As Dr. Gene said, it's going to continue to change. It's going to continue to morph. We're going to take that journey with you. You all make it more stimulating for us. I hope we make it more stimulating for you. Week 3, enjoy. And again, we'll be on Twitter. We'll be doing everything we do. Audible, we'll be back Thursday night, next Sunday morning, all those things. Thank you, everybody. Oh, and one last thing. Oh, I almost forgot. This week only, we've unlocked all of our DraftKings content. So go check it out. You got a couple hours. You can use that content to win a free Football Guys subscription. Go to the site, get the research, enter the DraftKings Fantasy Football Contest for the first 15 spots to get a free subscription. Get all your picks in by 1 Eastern, about 2 hours today. And the first 15 spots will get a free Football Guys subscription this week only. All of the DraftKings content on Football Guys is free, and you go to dkng.co/Football Guys to draft your lineup. dkng.co/Football Guys. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for more details. And again, always check out footballguys.com for all the details. Have a great week 3, everybody.